elections are important, but I think they are only 20% of the solution to the problem. 80% it has to be whole of the government approach, that is governance, socio-economic development, socio-political emancipation, and all that. So that's the key point. And last but not the least, we need to move away from being a negative leveraging state to a positive leveraging state, where we want to be cultural partners of the world, we want to be trade partners of the world, and be partners in development. Thank you very much, sir. Now we have Dr. Adil to talk about deterrence.
Thank you very much, Sanober Institute and TMUC. I'm especially grateful for Ambassador Azaz to include this topic, because these days generally there is reluctance to talk about nuclear issues or nuclear deterrence because of the environment also, and also some people think that this is too sensitive a subject to be discussed in public. But at the outset, like I always tell my students at the university, nuclear capability is a national capability. It should be owned by the people, because if there are nuclear weapons ever used, these are not like conventional weapons कि किसी battlefield में use होगा and limited damage होगा. The cities would be destroyed, millions would be killed. That is why all over the world, the control, the use, what needs to be done in the nuclear domain is with the political leadership, and that's because the nations are affected जब nuclear weapons उसके होंगे. Ambassador Azaz, I think he took a very interesting start कि इसको bilingual उसमें होना चाहिए इसको हमारी debate को. तो it just gave me an idea how to define nuclear deterrence in Urdu. तो मैंने कहा जोहरी दहशत कहेंगे इसको या क्या कहेंगे, लेकिन if somebody can coin this term, I think that's very useful, because we keep talking about nuclear deterrence in English, and Urdu is our own language and we don't know how to define nuclear deterrence for us. Yeah.
उर्दू का चैलेंज ये है कि थर्मामीटर की जो डेफिनेशन है उर्दू में आला मकासुल हरारत, so it becomes so difficult to define English words.
Okay, so coming back to this, what actually nuclear deterrence is? Have you ever heard or discussed in your class? Because the senior lot, they know. Anybody who has heard about it, just raise your hand. Nuclear deterrence की आपने कभी बात की हो यूनिवर्सिटी के अंदर? Only one. We are a nuclear weapon state, and you are the leaders for next generation leaders. You have to make the policies. So if you don't know about nuclear deterrence or nuclear weapons, or how nuclear weapons are integrated in your national policies, so who is going to plead Pakistan's case? So this is very important, and that's why I keep talking to my students also, and I will encourage you also. So nuclear deterrence in a nutshell, it is instilling the fear, as General Hashmat already briefly mentioned about that don't mess with us, otherwise I'll inflict you with the laws that will be unacceptable to you. So that's fear of punishment. It's not about use of nuclear weapons. So deterrence is all about how you deter your adversary from taking a certain action that is not in your interest, but you don't intend to actually use nuclear weapons. Because if you have used nuclear weapon, so deterrence is already zero. So you have not been able to convince your adversary. So sometimes you have to become irrational to justify your actions, and that is what Thomas Schelling has said, rationality of irrationality. So once you are dealing with nuclear weapons, it is very important that you should understand when to use this nuclear card, and if you repeatedly use this nuclear card, you indulge in that nuclearism behavior, and the credibility of nuclear deterrence would reduce. So that's the technicalities. I don't want to go into further details, but it's important to understand, because it's very common that people say we are a nuclear weapon state. How did it happen? How did India carry out a surgical strike? Why didn't we use nuclear weapons? So nuclear weapons is not a panacea for all kinds of threats. It has to be used in a specific environment. and only then it will have a right kind of an impact. So with this background, why we acquired nuclear weapons? We were a reluctant entrant into the nuclear game because we didn't have the resources. It's a very expensive game. For a country like Pakistan, it was very difficult. But once your adversary with significant conventional advantage, it acquired nuclear capability, that created an imbalance. So there was no choice for Pakistan but to acquire nuclear weapon and restore that strategic balance. And that is why the compulsion was there. And we were fortunate that despite limited resources, our scientists and our nation contributed and sacrificed, and we acquired this nuclear capability. And that is why it's a very prized possession. All Pakistanis, they own and associate themselves with nuclear capability, irrespective of which government is in power. What role nuclear weapons have played in the past between India and Pakistan? If you see pre-1998, we had several major wars with India. Post-1998, once we became overt nuclear weapon state, there has been no war since 1998, major war I'm saying. That's one of the major factors is because that nuclear deterrence is effective against India, that has deterred India from crossing that threshold or launching that major offensive against Pakistan. So that's what nuclear weapons have played, the role that nuclear weapons have played. But many scholars, they say, post-1998, if there has been no major war, there have been number of serious military crises between India and Pakistan. So these social scientists explain that phenomena with strategic stability, instability paradox. Without going into technicalities of that, just brief explanation that this is a Cold War construct, that if there is a stability between nuclear weapon states at the strategic level, there could be an incentive for either of the adversary to engage in a low intensity conflict or limited conflict. That's instability at the lower level. And that's why we had number of crises, but again, those were manageable, but because nuclear deterrence was effective during all those crises. Now, the third point is, what are new technologies that could affect nuclear deterrence between India and Pakistan? If some of you had been following the military developments, India has been modernizing its armed forces. It has been conducting certain capabilities that could have some impact on your nuclear deterrence. For example, ballistic missile defense. So India is inducted, it is getting from Russia also as 400. So the objective is that from the Indian perspective, they think that if they launch a conventional attack against Pakistan in the future, and Pakistan, if decides to retaliate with nuclear weapons, their missile defensive system would be able to intercept those missiles. So that's an acceptable cause from the Indian perspective. So that becomes destabilizing, because it gives a false sense of security to the Indian military planners that we can take care of Pakistan's nuclear strike in case of a major conflict. So that becomes destabilizing because it's a false thing. In nuclear game, first of all, there is no foolproof BMD system in the world for now. Even United States doesn't have that assurances that it can intercept all incoming missiles from its adversary. So India is not United States. And secondly, the distances between India and Pakistan are so less that there is no BMD system that is going to work. But having that capability with a person like Prime Minister Modi, he can take that risk. Let's go and launch a major offensive, and if Pakistan retaliates, so our missile defenses would be able to intercept. That becomes destabilizing. Then hypersonic weapons, the supersonic cruise missiles that India is acquiring, the anti-satellite weapons, that if they are able to neutralize your satellites in the space, your nuclear command and control, if they can compromise in that, so that becomes destabilizing. So these are some of the technologies that India is acquiring, and that can be destabilizing between India and Pakistan. Then coming to the emerging technologies or the disruptive technologies, the artificial intelligence, the cyber. What if they launch cyber attack against your military command center or nuclear command center to neutralize that? So that becomes destabilizing. Artificial intelligence, I'm sure the youngsters, they are very familiar with this term. We don't know the true potential of artificial intelligence. But for now, what we know is that it can be utilized for peaceful purposes also and equally destructive purposes also. So it's an artificial intelligence suit, the number of capabilities that it can be integrated in your weapons. So if you in future, if you are planning to allow weapons to take decisions by themselves by integrating that artificial intelligence into that, something that we call as lethal autonomous weapons or autonomous systems. And if those autonomous systems have nuclear warhead and they have to decide, so human factor has been subtracted. So the impact in that on strategic stability. So that's the kind of destabilizing impact it would have on India-Pakistan relation and in general also. Then some of the concepts that have emerged, the cross-domain deterrence. If a certain state has advantage in cyber domain, and if it launches that cyber attack against your nuclear command and control center, neutralizes that, so what are the options for the nuclear weapon state? Should that state retaliate with nuclear weapons? As I said earlier, nuclear weapons is not a panacea for all kinds of threats. It's not an equalizer for all kinds of a threat. That complicates deterrence dynamics, and that's why we need to understand how emerging technologies are going to have impact for the future of nuclear deterrence. There are certain other technical terms, I'll not go into that, but just mentioning that integrated deterrence, the recent concept introduced by United States, that the military, economic, diplomatic capabilities of United States and its allies that can be potentially be used against adversaries, the new concept of integrated deterrence. And since India is an ally of United States or strategic partner, they don't want to be labeled as an ally. They say we don't like this term, so they use strategic partners. So if those capabilities of partners are integrated with United States, so that's a scenario we have to look at for the future. So that's what is integrated deterrence. Finally, what is the future of deterrence as a whole in South Asia? I know I'm overshooting my time, just briefly a couple of words. We have economic restraints. We cannot spend what India is spending, as has already been mentioned. As we had been doing in the past, we have to be more innovative in finding solutions. We don't have to, number one, if you have nuclear capabilities, numbers do not matter. You don't have to have parity in nuclear or conventional because your strategic deterrence compensates for your conventional asymmetry also. But again, if the asymmetry goes beyond a certain limit, it does affect your credibility of your nuclear deterrence. So you have to take certain action. But since you do not have the resources, so you have to be more innovative in your solutions, and you have to cater for that economic disparity also and the military disparity also. And that's where the future leaders, they would have to think. And secondly, you have to develop your capabilities as per your national objectives. Unlike India, you don't want to be a global hegemon or a regional hegemon. You have specific national security objectives, that the maintenance of integrity of your sovereignty and your territorial boundaries. For that, whatever is enough, you should be building that much. So with that, because the time is already up, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Adil. Kinetic operations are important, but I think they are only 20% of the solution to the problem. 80% it has to be whole of the government approach, that is governance, socio-economic development, socio-political emancipation, and all that. So that's the key point. And the last but not the least, we need to move away from being a negative leveraging state to a positive leveraging state, where we want to be cultural partners of the world, we want to be trade partners of the world, and be partners in development. Thank you very much, sir. Now we have Dr. Adil to talk about deterrence.